day 699 of the Trump administration. Here we are, one away from 700 days in office. Just ahead tonight, we'll have the latest on the backlash over the president's decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. And just a short time ago, the Senate passed a continuing resolution to keep the federal government funded until at least February, something short of a profile in courage. It now goes on to the House. More ahead on that as well. But we begin with brand new reporting from the Washington Post on the Mueller investigation involving veteran Trump ally and advisor Roger Stone. Post says the Mueller team wants a copy of Stone's testimony, his official testimony before Congress last year, a sign that the special counsel may be getting closer to charging Stone with a crime. Reporter Manuel Roig Franzio, who will join us just in a moment, shares a byline with three of his colleagues at the paper. They write, the Mueller team, quote, asked the House Intelligence Committee on Friday for an official transcript of Stone's testimony, according to people familiar with the request. It's the first time Mueller has formally asked the committee to turn over material the panel has gathered in its investigation of Russian interference of the 2016 campaign. According to the people, the piece adds that Stone, who was, quote, in contact with the candidate during the 2016 campaign, has been a focus of the special counsel as Mueller probes whether the Trump campaign had advanced knowledge of WikiLeaks' release of Democratic emails allegedly hacked by Russian operatives. Now, the Post reports that Stone says he had not been notified of Mueller's request, that the House Intel Committee is expected to take up the transcript request tomorrow in a closed-door session and vote on it. This past weekend, incoming committee chairman, Democrat Adam Schiff of California, had this to say about Roger Stone.
I believe that there's ample reason to be concerned about his truthfulness, and I do think that with respect to Mr. Stone and perhaps others, the special counsel is a better position to determine the truth or falsity of that testimony, and that we ought to provide it to special counsel.
As we alluded to, Roger Stone's been part of Donald Trump's inner circle for a long time, friend of almost 40 years, advising him on both political and business matters. Back in the 80s, Stone ran a well-known Washington lobbying firm along with ex-Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. He's been loyal to Trump and has publicly said he's not going to go soft now.
There's no circumstance under which I would testify against the president because I'd have to bear false witness against him. I'd have to make things up, and I'm not going to do that.
That comment on ABC News prompted this response from the president, quote, nice to know that some people still have guts. The feds have been reportedly focusing on another Roger Stone associate in regard to WikiLeaks. Late last month, reports emerged that Mueller has emails from the New York-based birther and conspiracy theorist Jerome Corsi written to Stone that seemed to anticipate the release of hacked Democratic emails during the campaign. Both men deny having any inside knowledge about what WikiLeaks was planning. Stone has said he spoke to Trump the day after receiving those messages from Corsi. This weekend, Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani was asked about their conversation.
Did Roger Stone ever give the president a heads up on WikiLeaks leaks concerning Hillary Clinton and the DNC?
No, he didn't. No.
Not at all.
I don't believe so. But again, if Roger Stone gave anybody heads up about WikiLeaks leaks, that's not a crime. It would be like giving him heads up that the Times is going to print something. The crime is conspiracy to hack. Collusion is not a crime.
In addition to all of that, so much to react to there, the Daily Beast is reporting Mueller is scrutinizing Trump associates who may have tried to shape the administration's foreign policy by offering to ease U.S. sanctions on Russia. According to three sources, quote, the special counsel's office is preparing court filings that are expected to detail Trump associates' conversations about sanctions relief and spell out how those offers and counter proposals were characterized to top figures on the campaign and in the administration. And tonight, the Wall Street Journal reports that Trump's testimony from investigations in 1988 and again in the year 2000 show he was well acquainted with campaign finance laws. Back in 1999, he told Larry King no one knew more about campaign finance than he did. The Journal writes, that knowledge could, quote, be critical of if investigators ever pursue a case against him over his alleged direction of hush money payments in the 2016 campaign. The paper adds that Rudy Giuliani previously argued that Trump had limited understanding of campaign finance laws. With all of that in mind, we bring in our leadoff panel on a Wednesday night. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for The New York Times. Mimi Rocah, a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, now a distinguished fellow in criminal justice at the Pace University School of Law. And the aforementioned Manuel Roig-Franzia, features writer for The Washington Post. Manuel, I'd like to begin with you because it's your shared byline that begins our broadcast tonight. Tell us what you know about this request and what it may portend.
Well, it's a significant request for this reason. Legal experts say that prosecutors, when they're in the final stages of their investigation, when they're leading up to potentially bringing charges against someone, they need an official transcript of their remarks. And that's exactly what Mueller has been asking for right now from the House Intelligence Committee. It's viewed as a possible signal that they could be moving towards charges against Roger Stone, who, as you mentioned, is such a significant figure in the history of Donald Trump and has had such a close relationship with him for so long.
Manuel, we happen to have a legal expert with us, in fact, a crackerjack lawyer, and that's Mimi. And Mimi, I heard this described this way earlier tonight. If you're going to file a tax case, even though you can work from Xerox copies as you're compiling the case, on the eve of filing, you've got to see and feel the actual signed return, like it is with this transcript. Maybe Mueller's office has been working off a dependable Xeroxed or electronically sent transcript. This has to have the imprimatur of the committee. And do you follow the rest of this story that this could mean very bad things for Roger Stone?
Yes, Brian, I do agree with that inference that people seem to be drawing from this. Under the rules of evidence, you need to get the best or original document. You can't, to charge someone to put into court. And obviously, they would want to have that, just to make sure that the copies that they've been looking at are accurate. But more importantly, under the rules of evidence, you need to have the original documents eventually in court. I think it is not a question if Roger Stone is going to be charged, but when, and this makes it seem more imminent, and also what he will be charged with. This would seem to indicate that he will be charged with some kinds of false statements relating to his testimony in Congress, but I would suspect that he will also be charged with other things. And so I think that's really, sort of the hanging question out there. Is he going to be charged with some kind of, not collusion, but conspiracy? Will he be charged with, crimes in addition to the false statements? And what will the false statements be? What will the evidence be that Mueller puts forward of his lies to Congress? That will be very revealing to us.
And Peter, let's take our theme from Mimi. I'm not going to ask you if the West Wing is preoccupied with all these political matters. I'm going to ask you how much, keeping in mind last night the U.S. Senate passed a groundbreaking, landmark piece of legislation on criminal justice and sentencing reform. It's going to free thousands of people from our prisons across the country. That could have been a layup day, an easy victory lap for a normal White House, could it not?
Yeah, it's very striking. If you look at the president's schedule for the last week or so, basically has almost nothing on it from day to day. Now, you could say that's because he has this looming government shutdown to worry about, and therefore maybe better to keep the schedule clear. But I think what it indicates as well is just how consumed he is and how consumed his White House is with all the incoming fire coming, across his bow at this point. Not just the latest reporting you mentioned tonight, but in the last 2 weeks, we've seen day after day. We saw, the Flynn hearing and Manafort and Cohen and Maria Butina and so forth. It's been more intense, more rapid, more accelerated than we've seen it since the beginning of this set of investigations more than a year ago. And it's definitely consuming the White House at a time when they don't know what's ahead of them. Democrats are about to take the House and about to take over subpoena power. Much is, about to happen for him on the investigation front with that as well.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.